Hello, and welcome to our session about Office Ergonomics. My goal today is that when you're finished with the training, you feel confident that you can not only evaluate your workstation or someone else's, but that you can also implement some changes that help you to feel more comfortable when working. So let's get started. So how long is 30 minutes? I'd like you to take just a few seconds to find the timer function on your phone. It's usually under the clock app. The idea is to set it for about 30 minutes. What I want to show you is really how quickly 30 minutes can pass. Ideally, it's important to change postures at least every 20 or 30 minutes. Sometimes we get so into our work or what we're doing at the computer, we often forget to get up and move. We might have a report we need to get out, and the next thing 2 hours have passed and you haven't even moved. And once you do move, you find you're very stiff. So it's very important to keep that in mind and to change postures frequently. So I'll give you just a second to find the feature on your phone, set it for 30 minutes, and then we'll get going again. So with today's training, what we're going to do is review what ergonomics is, what proper posture is at the computer workstation, the need for breaks, as I've already mentioned, and also general recommendations where to place your equipment, things like your laptop, your PC, your So first of all, what is ergonomics? Ergonomics is the science of designing the job to fit the worker, not forcing the worker to fit the job. Essentially, we know a lot more what's healthier for the human body, and we have the tools more than ever to adjust our workstation to accommodate that. And so our goal is, rather than force people to sit at a workstation or stand at a workstation that isn't adjustable or forcing them to be in awkward postures, we can make those changes now. And that's what this PowerPoint will review. So what factors affect our comfort? I'm going to go over all these in more detail, but in general review, static or prolonged postures can affect our comfort at the workstation. Awkward postures can too, and I'll go over different segments of the body and what the preferred posture is and what postures you generally want to avoid. Repetition, meaning asking the same muscle tendon groups to perform the same activity repeatedly or over and over again, can be very fatiguing and also uncomfortable. Forceful exertions may also be a factor that affects our comfort. Things like manually lifting, lowering, pushing, pulling, or carrying. Although these aren't as prevalent in an office workstation as they might be in manufacturing, they still might occur. Other forceful exertions could also be just our hand movements, gripping the mouse all day to perform computer tasks, using a stapler, for example. Exerting that hand force can be fatiguing. Contact stress is another factor. Contact stress is when a part of our body is touching or in contact with a hard work surface. For example, when we rest our wrists on a hard desk edge without a wrist rest, that contact stress can lend to that fatigue. Or sometimes we might have a very tall person who's trying to sit in a workstation that doesn't have much leg room, and their legs or knees might be constantly pressing against the desk. We also look at the environment, particularly cold temperature and lighting. When we're cold, for example, we tense, our muscles shorten, and in that stage, they may fatigue more quickly. Also, we take a look at lighting. A couple of concepts we consider is that we want to avoid a lot of contrast with our lighting. We don't want an area that's very dimly lit right against an area that's very brightly lit. That might lend to some eye fatigue. Also, if we don't have adequate lighting, sometimes to read a hard copy on our desk, we might squint our eyes or we may lean forward or bend our neck down to view it better. And all of these are postures that we don't want to occur. So we'll get started. I mentioned earlier that static or prolonged postures is one factor we want to avoid. Static posture, or what we call static loading, refers to physical exertion in which the same posture or position is held throughout that exertion. Again, think of when you get out of a car, if you've been on a long road trip. If you haven't gotten out of the car in about 4 to 6 hours, once you finally do, when you step out, you probably notice you're pretty stiff. We don't just jump out and ready to go. We're usually pretty stiff, and that's an example of that static loading. These types of exertions can put increased loads or forces on the muscles and tendons, which contributes to the fatigue. So the remedy for this, as I've already mentioned, is to get moving, change your postures. I also mentioned awkward postures is another factor that we look at. I'm going to go through different body segments next and talk about what the preferred posture is and what are the ones you generally want to avoid. So we'll start with the hand and the wrist here. The middle posture, or neutral, is what we aim for. These other postures are the ones we want to avoid. If you notice, especially the ones on the bottom, what we call radial deviation and ulnar deviation. This is a pretty common motion we do at work, especially if we're doing a lot of hand-intensive work with the mouse. Also, when we're using the mouse, if it's a standard type, we're probably doing a lot of gripping, and it's done for all day or a prolonged period. So all those factors add up to general fatigue. Posture-wise, again, we aim for that middle posture or neutral. To help you achieve that, generally you want to keep the keyboard and mouse centered to you at the workstation, around elbow height, on a flat surface, whether that's the desktop or a keyboard tray. You want it flat and placed together. You don't want to have the keyboard and mouse on 2 different levels or far apart from each other. To help you attain that, often it's just helpful to just adjust your chair height. Sometimes you can adjust the keyboard height. You also should look for ways to reduce that repetition and force, as I mentioned. There sometimes can be alternate keystrokes or shortcuts that you can take that reduce the amount of repetition from keying. Wrist rest, a lot of times the gel type can be really useful in reducing that contact stress. You can get some for just the keyboard or just for the mouse or both. You can also look at alternate style keyboards and also an alternate style mouse. There are some mouses or mice, for example, that don't require the forceful gripping as I mentioned. They require just a gentle tap or gliding your finger across it to move the mouse around, and it eliminates the grip altogether. Another idea is to switch hands when you're using the mouse. Most of us probably use our dominant hand when we're using the mouse. If you can keep in mind, maybe every couple hours, switch hands with the mouse. Use the mouse on your non-dominant side. You may feel kind of clumsy or klutzy at first, but I really can guarantee in not that long of a time, you'll be pretty proficient with that other hand. And what that does is allows your dominant hand to take a rest break. As I mentioned already, again, just taking breaks, letting those hands rest. Things that you generally want to avoid with the hands and the wrists is you want to avoid having your keyboard and mouse to one side of your workstation. Working at that angle often puts us in a twisting posture and awkward hand postures. You also want to avoid having your keyboard tilted. If you look under your standard keyboard, you'll find there's 2 legs that extend out. Generally, you want to flatten those or tuck those under so that your keyboard is flat. Same thing with your keyboard tray. When our keyboard is angled or our tray is angled, then we assume those awkward wrist postures. To help us have that neutral or straight wrist, we want to work on a flat work surface. We want to avoid having it too high or too low. And again, sometimes adjusting your chair or the keyboard tray can help with that. Some of these things I've already mentioned before is reducing repetition, reducing direct pressure on your hands and wrists, that prolonged gripping by just taking micro breaks or looking at different style mice that reduce or eliminate gripping altogether. Another thing to keep in mind is try to avoid performing hand strengthening exercises when you're on break, like those squeeze balls, unless your physician, your healthcare provider, your physician, your therapist have recommended that you do so. But again, we need to rest those hands. And so doing more strengthening exertions while we're resting or on break may not really help our hands that much. Also, take a look at your mouse that you're using. Make sure it's not too wide. If you're having to grip or hold that mouse using the very ends of your fingertips, then it's probably too wide for you and adding extra stress. You also want to keep in mind, avoid using a cord, or make sure if you have a mouse that's still on a cord that it's not too taut or tight, because what happens is you're having to pull against that all the time when you're using the mouse, and that lends to that extra force we don't want. So again, check that your cord, if you still have one for your mouse, has a lot of extra room so that you can move the mouse around without extra force. Next body area we'll look at is the shoulders and elbows. The picture at the top is an example of what we don't want to do. Generally, we want to be able to sit close enough, whether that's bringing the keyboard back closer to the edge of the desk, or just simply moving our chair in closer, so that we sit with our shoulders level and our arms bent about 90 degrees. So if I were to look at your profile, what I want to see is generally that your arm is in an L position or bent 90 degrees, and your shoulders are down and relaxed. To help you do that, you want to keep the reaches below shoulder height and above the knee height when you're sitting. You also want to keep the reaches generally in front of the body about 6 inches to 14 inches from the desk edge. That helps you avoid overreaching or extensive reaching in front. Keeping the elbows near the waist is very important. Again, this picture is an example of us working with our elbows in front of the body, which is what we want to avoid. We want those elbows right at the side of our body. We want to decrease contact stress to the elbow as well. In the picture, for example, her elbows are resting on that hard desk edge, which we want to avoid. Also, your elbows might get irritated from the armrest of your chair. So to adjust those properly, first of all, take your arms off the armrest and let them hang at the side of your body. Make sure your shoulders are just level and relaxed. And then lower your armrest to the lowest position. With your arms still at the side of your body, then place the armrest underneath them for the proper height. What we want to avoid is the hand behind the body or above the shoulder frequently, the hand crossing the center of our body or midline. So look at how your desk is arranged. The items that you use frequently should be closest to the hand that's going to use them the most often, so that we don't frequently cross over our body to get them. We want to avoid the elbow winging, or I call it the chicken position. That's where the elbows are held away from the side of the body, either in front like the picture, or also to the side. We want to avoid reaching too far in front of the body. We want to take a look at our heights of our chair, our armrests and equipment, as I mentioned already, and also ensuring we don't have anything pressing directly on our elbows, like from the desk edge or for our armrests. The next position of the body we'll take a look at is our spine. I'll first start with the low back. Our preferred posture is to be just upright, sitting directly upright in our chair. To help us attain that, you generally want to work around waist height or no higher than elbow height. A sit-stand option is preferable so that you can change postures. Again, the reach range, 6 to 14 inches from the desk edge. When we're standing, we want to keep the reaches generally between our waist height and no higher than shoulder height. When we're sitting, we generally want to keep reaching between our knee to shoulder height. You want to also look at your chair's backrest and maybe adjust it as well for more support. First of all, ensure you're using your backrest for support. If you're sitting on the edge of your seat, it's very fatiguing to your low back. Take a look at your backrest. If you can adjust it in height, do it so the curve of the chair's backrest is in the curve of your low back as well. Sometimes you might need some extra support. If your backrest doesn't adjust, or maybe it doesn't adjust enough and you need some extra support, there's different rolls out there, pillow rolls. There are half rolls and full rolls, so find one that's more comfortable for you. Oftentimes, to help our back, we might also need a footrest. I'll get to the lower body in just a minute, but if we're sitting especially with our hips higher than our knees, meaning our chair might be too high for us, a footrest can really help so that our knees and hips are even or the same height together, and that can also help our low back quite a bit as well. Although it's not as prevalent generally in the office, again, you want to make sure when you do have to lift that you're using good material handling techniques, keeping loads close, bending your knees while keeping your back upright. Things you want to avoid is sitting for too long, twisting, bending, reaching above the shoulder frequently or below our waist frequently, because often with those postures we use poor body mechanics. We want to avoid lack of back support, as I mentioned, and really utilize the support of the chair. We want to avoid extended reaching. I mentioned earlier that's hard on the shoulder, but it's also hard on the back because we tend to do a lot of forward bending when we have to reach too far in front of us or too far to the side. It may also affect our back if we're having to view an area that's too high or too low because we assume awkward postures. And as I mentioned earlier, you want to use good material handling techniques. You want to avoid carrying or lifting loads away from the body. Here's an example of good and bad sitting posture for the back. In the picture on the left, she's sitting without any kind of support and obviously slumping. She's sitting on the edge of her seat and she's bending forward. The picture to the right, however, is much better posture. She's taking advantage of the chair's backrest, and it's generally in a higher position for her so that it's supporting her low back curve. When we look at this for proper back alignment and posture, imagine there's a line hanging from the ceiling. It's called a plumb line. So make sure you're in the proper vertical alignment. That imaginary line should go through your ear, your shoulder, your elbow, and your hip. Those should all be in a straight alignment. And that's just one way that you can check by using that imaginary line that you're in proper vertical alignment. The next part of our spine we'll talk about is our neck or cervical area. The preferred posture is to try to keep our chin level. To help us do that, a headset can be very, very beneficial. Document holders can also be very beneficial because they hold the document up rather than flat on our desk. When a document is flat on our desk and we're frequently looking down at it, we're bringing our chin down to our chest, and that posture, done repeatedly or for prolonged periods, can be very stressful to our neck. When you're sitting in your normal work posture, you want the monitor to be generally just over your eye level, just looking over the top of your monitor. Generally, monitors are adjusted last after we do our chair height. So when you're sitting in your upright posture with your chin level, gaze straight ahead. Your eyes should be just looking over the top of the monitor for proper height. It's okay to be looking down maybe about 15 degrees, 20 degrees, very minimal, but we really want to avoid having to tilt our head backward. So if you're wearing bifocals or trifocals or any type of corrective lens, you might actually have to put your monitor even lower so that when you're looking through that corrective part of your glasses, you're still looking just over the top of the monitor. You want to center your paperwork and your monitor. You don't want them to one side of your workstation, because when you do that, you're constantly turning your head to that one side, and that can be fatiguing to your neck. Monitors and documents should be about the same height and distance away from you. If it's a multi-user workstation, a lot of times an easily adjustable monitor stand is a good idea so that each user can adjust the monitor properly for them. What you want to avoid is bending your head downward, like chin to your chest, backward, tilting your chin up toward the ceiling, and to the sides, whether that's looking to one side frequently or bending your ear to your shoulder, which is something we often do when we put the phone's handset on our shoulder. And that's why that headset is a very good option. We want to avoid monitors and papers too high or too low. We also want to avoid, as I've already mentioned, cradling the phone between our neck and our shoulder, and avoid having things we use frequently, paperwork monitors, to one side. Not often talked about, but I did want to bring up, is our lower extremities and comfort for our lower body. Our preferred posture is to have our knees even with your hips, with your ankle bent about 90 degrees. In the picture on the left, that's an example of what not to do. If you notice, the knees are much lower than our hips, and our ankles or feet are tucked behind your body, which can place a lot of stress on the knees. You want to have your feet directly under your knees or even a little bit in front. What's a good thing to look for is look at the person's seam of their pants. Generally, again, you want that thigh level or parallel with the ground, and sometimes looking at the seam on their pants can help you visually to see that. Again, a sit-stand option is preferred. When you do sit, try to make sure your feet are flat and supported, as I've mentioned already, as far as being under the knee or your feet directly in front of your knees as well. You want to make sure there's toe and thigh clearance. Check under your desk. Are you storing a lot of things under your desk that are causing you to have that contact stress or to assume awkward postures? Sometimes our seats are too deep for us and they touch the back of our knees, and you want to try to avoid that. I have some more information coming up about that in just a minute. Sometimes to help with that, you can get a back support pillow to help add some seat depth to push you further away. You want to avoid your foot behind the knee, your knee higher or lower than your hip. That force or compression, as I mentioned, again, maybe the seat of the chair is too deep and causing that force or compression to the back of your knees. Make sure, again, as I mentioned, you have adequate space so that you can move your feet during the workday, move your legs, move your feet, and it's not constricted because you have things stored under your desk. For, again, a very tall person, make sure there's adequate room as well under the desk. Again, for our lower body, if they're not positioned correctly, it can also contribute to back and hip stress as well. So let's review our sitting posture again. First, look at the setup. Focus first on the tasks that you do the most often. Make sure you can easily reach those items you use the most frequently, and they're within that 6 inches to 14 inches from the desk edge. Also, based on your hand dominance, set up your workstation. In review, when we're looking at your profile, make sure your chin is level and your head centered. Make sure your shoulders are level and relaxed, and that your elbows are at the side of your body, not reaching in front of your body. Elbows should generally be about keyboard height. Your forearms should be parallel or level with the floor with your wrists straight. The trunk and the head should be vertically aligned. For your lower body, make sure your hips and knees are the same height with your thighs level or parallel with the ground, and your knees bent about 90 degrees. Your feet should be flat on the floor or on a footrest. And again, generally it's very helpful to have someone look at your posture from the side, your profile, to see if you're in this correct posture and alignment. Let's talk about standing. There's a lot of benefits that have been published about the benefits from standing. It can help reduce low back pain and foot swelling. Studies have also found it can help burn more calories than sitting and assist in weight control, weight management. A lot of people report they feel a lot more energetic because they're able to stand and change postures throughout the day. But do keep in mind that MSDs, musculoskeletal disorders, which are the type of disorders we're trying to stop with ergonomics, they can result from long-term static postures, whether you're sitting or standing. Actually, for some people, standing in one place can be very fatiguing or also cause discomfort. Standing can be more tiring. It can place additional loads on the circulatory system and increasing the risk of different diseases such as varicose veins. So again, we want to change positions, sitting some and then standing some. So again, if I haven't mentioned it already, we want to get moving. If you do stand at work, here's some recommendations. You generally want the same posture for your head, neck, back, and arms as we did for sitting. When you're standing, make sure your weight is evenly distributed on both feet, from the heels to the balls of your feet. Avoid favoring one side, standing on one leg all the time. Place feet evenly. Generally, it helps to place your feet about shoulder width apart. Also keep in mind, keep your knees soft. Don't lock your knees stiff. Avoid wearing heels when you have to stand. Sometimes it can help to place a foot on a small platform. And what that does is it helps to move our pelvis, rotate, and take some of the pressure off our low back. Just make sure that that small platform isn't a trip hazard or that you don't twist as well to reach your workstation. If you're having to stand on a hard surface like cement, it may help to use a small anti-fatigue mat as well. Just make sure also that's not a trip hazard. And keep the items close to you just like you would when sitting. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're raising or lowering your workstation, again, sometimes we have to reach way to the rear of the workstation to do this. Use good material handling techniques. Try to keep your spine upright and your knees bent when you're raising and lowering the desk. One last time, make sure you're moving it. Good postures, even if maintained after a long period of time, will eventually become uncomfortable and potentially damaging. Let's talk about equipment placement, where items should be placed. Look at the arms with the keyboard and the mouse first. Our preferred posture is the one on top here. If you look here, the elbows and wrists are generally about the same height, and the forearm is level or even with the ground. The bottom pictures are the ones we want to avoid. If you look, the keyboards are tilted in these pictures and it's causing awkward wrist postures. We're bending the wrist back or the wrist downward, and these are the ones we want to avoid. So again, flatten your keyboard, flatten your keyboard tray to help you assume that good posture with the wrist straight. Elbows should be at the side of the body, not in front of the body. Again, it may help to just sit closer to the workstation altogether or to bring the keyboard closer to the desk edge. The picture on the bottom there on the left is an example of what we want to avoid, where we're sitting too far away and you can see the elbows are in front of the body. The picture on the right is better because the person's elbows are at the side of their body and their shoulders are level and relaxed. Check that your armrests aren't too high and don't cause you to shrug or elevate your shoulders. Lower the armrests if you need to. A lot of times having lower armrests will help you sit closer to the desk as well because they don't get in the way. As I mentioned, make sure they're providing support, your armrests, but make sure they allow you to sit close to the work. Also make sure they're not putting direct pressure on your elbow as well. I mentioned earlier that you want to make sure there's about at least 2 finger widths of space between the back of your knee to the front of the chair. This picture shows when that chair is directly hitting the back of our knees, and that's pretty uncomfortable. So a lot of us, to avoid that, will scoot closer to the edge of the chair and then we don't get the benefits of the backrest. So if your seat is too long, again, sit all the way back, try to have some room there. The picture at the top is an example of a pillow you can try where it supports your back, but it allows you to sit closer to the edge of the seat so that you don't get that contact stress to your knees. Here's an example of what you do want to see. There's about a couple fingers width space there between the back of the knee to the seat. One good thing you can do is just learn more about your chair. Take some time to learn what all the different levers and different things do for your chair. Some chairs, for example, you can actually change the seat depth. There's a lever so you can push the seat in more, or you can pull it out more if you do need more length. Check if your backrest is height adjustable or if your seat angle can adjust. So learn your chair, look at the levers, and find out what they can do. Here's what I was mentioning earlier about the backrest. So this is an example of utilizing the backrest at the right height. The curve of the backrest generally is fitting the curve of the person's low back. Again, if it doesn't do that, or if your chair doesn't adjust in height, there's this half roll or full roll you can get to put behind you so that you do get some support in your low back curve. All right, my timer just went off. So that means our 30 minutes is up. It probably went pretty fast for a lot of you. So take some moments to stand and stretch if you'd like. If you'd like to finish the rest of this webinar standing, do so. But at least take a couple minutes standing. I'll continue with the webinar. As I was mentioning, learning your chair and what the different levers and features do, but this is an example of the chair's backrest going too far back. You can see the person is leaning back. Subsequently, what often happens then as a result is we crane our neck forward. We jet our head forward to compensate so we can read things on our desk or view the monitor. We want to avoid that. We want that more vertical position. As I mentioned, we generally want to have our keyboard flat on the desktop or keyboard tray for a straight wrist. Here's an example where the keyboard is tilted and it subsequently bends the wrists more. You might also notice in this picture that the person is resting their wrist on a hard desk edge, and we want to avoid that. And that generally can be done with a nice gel wrist rest or a mouse rest too. Again, place your keyboard and mouse at the same height and in close proximity to each other. In this picture, the mouse is too far away from the keyboard. We want to bring them together so we avoid a lot of lateral or sideways reaching. All right, monitors. Again, I find it most beneficial to first adjust my chair and the items on my desk, and I adjust the monitor pretty much as one of the last things. So are these wrong? Are these pictures wrong? Yes, no, maybe. It depends on how much each monitor is used. Often today we have at least 2 monitors at our workstation, sometimes even more than that. And there's general placement recommendations that'll help you feel more comfortable. If you have one monitor, generally you want to center that directly in front of you, like the picture here. That helps you to keep your chin, your neck more level and relaxed and at the right height. If you have 2 monitors, generally you want to put them together at the same height and distance. If you use both monitors about the same amount of time, generally you want to position them book style in front of you with the far ends of the monitors turned in slightly so that you don't have to turn your eyes or change your vision as much to read your monitors. Where the monitors meet together should be centered to you. So again, think of a book style directly in front of you, touching together in the center with the ends of the monitors turned inward just a little bit as well. If you have 2 monitors or more, but there's one monitor you use considerably more than the others, you could consider placing that center to you with the other one close by. So if one monitor is used, 75, 80, 85% of the workday, it may be better to actually center that one to you, but place the ones you don't use very often right nearby. So again, you don't have to turn your head too much to the side when you do use them. As for monitor height, again, we want to keep proper neck position in mind. As I mentioned before, when you're looking straight ahead with your chin level, you should be looking just over the top of your monitor, or maybe down just about 15 or 20 degrees below the line of vision. What we really want to avoid is having the monitor so that you're having to tilt your head backward or place your chin up toward the ceiling. You want to try to keep that chin level and relaxed. How about distance? Well, there's been various studies out there. Minimally, what they suggest, it should be about 24 inches away. Maximum, how far should it be? Well, studies have found at this point there's really no maximum distance. Put it at a distance that's comfortable for you. Keep in mind if you wear corrective lenses, that may come to play as well. For a lot of us, that may generally be about arm's length away. Just make sure, though, that whatever distance you do place it at, you don't squint to read it or assume awkward postures like bending in to read it or tilting your neck and chin to one side to try to read it. If you note in this picture on the top, the monitor is way too high. You see she's having to tilt her head back to view it. The picture on the bottom is our preferred posture, again, with the chin level to view the monitor. Monitor glare can also happen. You want to generally avoid that because that may lend to eye fatigue. To help you do that, use your window blinds. It may also help to place your monitor 90 degrees to windows. And what that means is you want to avoid having your back to the window. You also want to avoid when you're working facing the window directly. Rather, have your monitor to one side of the window rather than having it behind you or looking into it. You can also tilt your monitor downward just a little bit. That sometimes helps eliminate the glare. Just make sure it doesn't change your head posture. If you have a task light, redirect it away so it's not shining in your eyes or causing glare, shining right onto the monitor. Generally, it helps to have a matte work surface so you don't get any reflection up either. Take a look at your monitor. Make sure that you dusted it fairly frequently. Often we forget to do that. And if the characters aren't very legible, we may be squinting or changing our focal position frequently to try to view the characters. They've had a lot of studies recently also about blue light, the light coming from our phones, our iPads, and things like that, contributing to the eye stress as well. So make sure that you're not straining your eyes to view these items as well. So to help you alleviate that, there's what's called the 20-20-20 rule. And what that helps or means is every 20 minutes, look at least 20 feet away for at least 20 seconds. There's different apps out there, one called the Eye Reliever, for example, that can also be an audible reminder to help you do this. Or simply combine it when you're taking your 30-minute stretch break like we just did a few minutes ago. So think about your eyes. Every 20 minutes, look at least 20 feet away for at least 20 seconds to help your eyes. As I mentioned before, look at your desk. Check underneath your desk to make sure you have full room for your legs, your knees, that there's enough clearance that you can move your legs, your feet around easily. This also allows you to sit closer to your work as well. Make sure there's no contact stress to the body as pictured there on the right. How about general layout? Think about 3 zones of your work area. The items you use the most often should be in the usual work zone, closest to you. The items that you use occasionally should be in the next zone, or generally about arm's length away. The items you use hardly ever should be in that non-working area. Because when you reach to that area, usually we assume awkward postures like bending and extensive reaching. So look at your equipment on your desk. What things do you use the most often? Put closest. The things you use occasionally should be in the middle zone, and the things you rarely use should be in the hardest to reach spots in your work area. What about laptops? Often we have to sacrifice something in order to use the laptop. In order to get good arm posture, we sometimes have to sacrifice our neck to view the monitor, or vice versa. To have the monitor at the right height, it often places the keyboard on the laptop too high, which is hard on our upper body. One thing you can consider is a stand and external keyboard or mouse, like a docking station, to help you assume proper posture. In this example, we have the monitor higher for proper head posture, and we have an extra keyboard and mouse so that we can also have good arm posture at the same time. Thank you so much for attending our webinar. I hope you found this information helpful and that you can be more comfortable at your workstation.